in my first round with no fancy program. I had a slideshow, but I got on calls, right? And I worked with people. And I realized what this actually is the underbelly of stuff we don't talk about. That someone can really want it, someone can have the skill, capability, ability, potential, but there's other things that hold us back. And we all know that. We've all experienced that. There's some
Hmm.
days where you have the skill, you have the knowledge, you have everything that you need ingredient wise, but you can't show up, right? There's trauma, there's emotional regulation, there's decision making, there's all those things. And so I started working on that underbelly of like what's more than just knowing what to do and how to do it. True freedom comes from options. It's
Yeah.
not, you don't have to travel like me, you don't have to do any of those things. Do you have the option to do so?
Yeah, because
Right. And so,
that's what it's about, right? The freedom of choice. Do what you want.
right, exactly. That's where true freedom, because you can't identify what freedom actually is. It means something different to everybody. But for me, it was the options. Yeah, I had a student the other day, fell short this year. He was supposed to do 250K was the goal, fell short 238K, right? And a couple months ago, he's like, man, I don't know what it is. I'm struggling to hold the number one spot, right? And like, it's stressing me out. And I just asked him, like, why do you need the number one spot? And you could tell it was like, oh yeah, why do I need the number one spot? And he, dropped and I said, well, what if you had the perfect lifestyle and you spent more time with your wife and more time, doing the things you want and you're eating steaks and you're working out in the morning and you take Friday afternoons off and you were top three. Being able to, the pipe dreams are great, but they can't stay pipe dreams, right? So I want to make 10K. That's great. Well, why? And what does that mean? And what does that take? And what is that each day? A lot of people, you ask them their monthly goal, they know. You ask them, well, how many deals is that? They
Mm.
don't know. You ask them, how much is that per day, per week? They don't know. Right. And so it's a pipe dream that's not connected to anything. It doesn't motivate, it doesn't inspire, it doesn't have fuel to it. Right. But if it's, I want to put my kids in this university, right? Well, how much is the tuition? Okay. And how old are your kids? Right. And now we can start building the dream that's connected that when you hit those adversities, right, you're thinking about that thing rather than a random number that some marketer told you.
Well, JD, appreciate you jumping on
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
the world's best sales podcast out there.
100%.
That's it,
Really,
man.
really appreciate the help and support. So yeah, guys, if none of you is listening don't know JD, JD is the founder of UCM, correct? That's your baby, JD? Awesome.
Yeah,
And
Undeniable Closers, the company, and then UCM is kind of our flagship.
okay. And yeah, look, we're just gonna ask you a couple of questions, get to know you, find out a little bit more about you, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Easy, brother. Easy.
Easy. So I guess JD, we'll kick it off with how did you actually get started in the sales world? How did you end up in the high ticket space?
Oh, yeah. I mean, two different stories, I guess. I started in sales about 17, going on 18 years now.
Oh, damn.
And that was by accident. So my brother and the bar manager that I was working at, they had some issues, and I started getting shitty shifts all of a sudden. And so I'm like, I can't make any money. I'm in Calgary. I got to do something else. I applied for like 200 jobs, nothing, all crickets. And then I got this one response back. They told me it was going to be this like I forget the word and they used like direct to contact. It sounded good. Everybody was wearing suits. And then I showed up and we drove out to the middle of nowhere and started knocking doors. And I
Oh, damn.
realized that I'm doing door to door. So I did that for 2.5 years. Did really well with it. Decided to kind of move on. But then probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I just fell out of love with the corporate world. I'd kind of peaked in. I had my dream position, and
Hmm.
I hated it. And before then, I'd always been able to use something as an excuse. You guys know, like, oh, the manager's garbage, or
Mm.
they're stealing my commissions, or this happens, or the hours suck, or the
Yeah.
products, right? And now I had nothing to complain about. Honestly, on paper, everything I had dreamed of, everything was perfect. And I realized it wasn't the offer, it was me.
Hmm.
And I realized that the corporate world had just had an expiry date and the date was today. So I quit. and was just kind of exploring everything. I went down that rabbit hole of make money online, and that's a deep rabbit hole. And
Yeah.
for those that know me, I have no technical background. It's amazing that I can be on this call today. That's about as far as I get on the digital side. So like building websites and creating stores and stuff, that wasn't it. And then I stumbled upon a few coaches, started following them, and they were talking about their closers and stuff like that. And I'm like, ooh, that's it. That's it. And so that was about 7, 8 years ago now that I found the remote sales space. And it was just kind of, again, fluke. I was traveling. I needed something to be able to basically travel tokens is what I was looking for,
Yeah.
and stumbled upon this industry.
Yeah. So you kind of just did it just to pursue the lifestyle you were looking for. I mean, because look, you've been in it what, like 7, 8 years? That's pretty much like a veteran of the space now. Didn't even most people didn't even know about it 2 years ago.
Right.
How have you kind of seen it change since you started to where it is now?
Yeah. It's been interesting. I think there's a lot more entrepreneurial spirits in the sales space now, which has a positive and a negative. I think
Mm.
there's a lot of people that have an impact and a lot of people doing that kind of sales plus, which I love, right? I think everybody should be doing some realm of it, whether it's personal branding, whether it's, starting a podcast, whether it's, offering to help people with what you do really well. The challenge that I see is people who aren't doing what they're doing well, being like, okay, well, that's very difficult. Let's start helping people with that instead of doing it and kind
Mm.
of getting good at it and then helping people. And so what I've seen since then is the positive changes is we're getting a more diverse workforce. We're getting more and more people that in traditional sales probably would have avoided this like the plague, right? We're getting introverts, we're getting, high empathy people, we're getting people all over the world, right? Which is changing the face of sales, which I think is really important, and showcasing that it doesn't have to be that one personality type that we all pictured in sales coming up, the Wolf of Wall Street
Yeah.
type, right? There's diverse. I think that is the best aspect. One of the challenges is that there's a large percentage of people that see this as a gold mine or a cash cow or a grab and go, and
Yeah.
that has affected a lot of things. When I first came into this industry, 15% was standard commission for closers, 10% was
15%.
standard for setters.
Really?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. And,
Wouldn't
and
want
I was,
15%.
able
Good
to
times.
negotiate 20% at times. 20%, sometimes upfront retainer signing bonuses, things like that. As more middlemen came in, and women, middlemen and women, but the opportunities now where there's only so many percentages as a business owner pays margins, right? And
Hmm.
what I found is the more we delegate certain aspects, the more that gets spread out. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that has been really challenging for me is the rise of paid pipelines and kind of that triangle offense that a lot of businesses are running, where it's basically, hey, I'll teach the business, I'll teach the closer, and I'll get paid for the recruiting, right? That trifecta as a business model, it's extremely profitable. When you look at the key players, they're all doing $1 million a month or more.
Hmm.
But where does that come from? And so the quality of those positions. And when I came in, there was a big focus on marketing, a big focus on marketing. Business owners were told you have to get your marketing down. Now, more and more, the message is, oh, just get a bunch of setters to do that for you.
Yeah.
Right. We're losing that contact. And so there's been good and bad. I still think it's an amazing opportunity. I still think there's so much growth, there's so much potential, but we have to be mindful of who and when we're delegating certain tasks that we could do ourselves rather than how we're learning certain things, right? There's been more of a tendency to say, you go do it for me rather than can you teach me how to do it, right? And I felt like, especially in some of the placement realm around getting the job, I feel like people's competency is low, and so they're frustrated and they're desperate. So they're like, "Hey, just go do it for me." But when we're talking about a $5,000 introduction or taking 5% off my commission every time I make a sale just to introduce me, my thought was I'll introduce myself, right?
Yeah.
I don't. I rely, I'll put my name in the hat, but I'm not giving up that long-term
Yeah.
potential just because, I mean, a lot of places, what are they doing? They're going out, pitching a service, right? And saying, hey, we got people, let me introduce you. I can make that introduction myself. I think that has cut into a significant chunk. When you look at it, that's 30%
Hmm.
of the commission, right? If it used to be 15, now it's standard 10,
Hmm.
right? That's 5%. That's huge. That's
Yeah,
30% of the income right there for an introduction
Yeah.
and very little
Yeah.
else.
crazy.
I guess like for you going from the corporate sales into this space, like what would you say is like the biggest shock for people? Like someone is about to jump into this space this year.
Mm.
What would you say is like you gotta be careful? Like what
Yeah.
you gotta worry about?
I think you need to be mindful of offer selection. And I don't think it gets talked about enough. It's something that I'm a broken record of a few core things. I say them over and over again, and I've been saying them for 3 years, and people think I'm nuts, but it's starting to catch on that the offer selection is one of the biggest indicators of income. It's not the only indicator. I am not a this or that, right? I'm a this and that type of person, but
Yeah.
offer selection, choosing the right vehicle is makes a huge difference. I think coming from the corporate world, it's job search, right? Then company, then people. But from what I've seen in the job posting to what I experience in the job is usually pretty linear. That is
Hmm.
not the case here,
No, hell no.
right?
No,
So
not at
in
all.
the
No.
traditional market, I could pretty much predict my earnings right before having an interview.
Yeah.
Right. I know, okay, base plus commissions. This is the quota. This is the KPIs. These are the targets. Like on target earnings, OTE meant something in the corporate world. It means absolutely shit here.
Wait,
Right.
so Jay,
It's
you're telling me that them Facebook posts that say OT with 20K are all lying to me?
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
every opportunity is a 20K opportunity until you realize you have to build it up, right? Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
what I always tell my students is like, I can offer you a six-figure job right now. Go make me 1 million. And that's basically what a lot of the OT in this space is. Yeah, it's a six-figure job. Go make me 1 million. Okay, how do
Hmm.
we do that? Have you ever done that? Is anybody else doing that? Well, no. Right. And I understand it from a business perspective. Listen, like everybody who has a business, it's kind of like having a child. You think your child's the cutest, and we all know that that's not true in some cases. Not every kid is the cutest, right? But
Yeah.
it's your baby, it's your business. It's as an entrepreneur to not go fucking insane, you have to be wildly optimistic at all times. Everything I do with UCM and Undeniable Closer, I think is going to be absolutely revolutionary. I think it's going to be quick and easy and simple. And everything is 3 times less effective than I thought. And it takes 3 times longer. Right. And so I realize that now as a business, the business is selling the business. They're selling the opportunity to you because they want A players. And why wouldn't they? Right? They're wildly optimistic. I don't even think all the business owners are lying per se about these OTEs, right? Because again, what is OTE? It's on target. Well,
Hmm.
a lot of businesses just don't hit targets. They're not capable of hitting their targets. So it's not so much, they're not saying, hey, the expected or predictable earnings is, right? They're saying, hey, the target's this. I can tell you the target's $1 billion, but right, what's the process or predictability for hitting
Yeah.
that? Right. And so that for me was the biggest shift of like, hey, I can sell. I'm a hard worker. I've always been able to have those qualities that kind of get me in. I can learn it quickly, and I can kind of move up the ranks and model the right people and get in where I fit in. But having a stunted vehicle, that was the biggest challenge for me early on making that transition. And kind of I spun my tires for about 4 months, thinking like, and then you have people around you that are telling you, well, it's just you got to get better. You got to get better. I'm
Yeah.
like, man, if I
So,
close 100% of the leads I'm getting right now, I'm still not making the OTE. So what's going
yeah.
on?
No.
Yeah, so I guess on that then, like when you say offer selection, like what do you actually look out for? Because that's something
Mm.
that for me, what I'm looking to do, I'm on an offer now and it's doesn't really resonate with what I want and my where I'm kind of looking to go. So when you say offer selection, like what are some of the key things you look out for in that?
Right. So one exercise that I teach in UCM that is really valuable because again, each person is different. If I was going to come back now, right, 17 years in and leave UCM and say I want an offer now, my list is very different than when I was just starting out.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Mhm.
one exercise that I would recommend for everybody is a line down the middle of the page, right? On one side, the must-haves, right? These are must-haves. These are, I will not consider, I will not, is 0% chance of me moving forward unless they have these things. These are my needs, right? There's non-negotiable. And then on the other side is my wish list, right? Like I like taking Friday afternoons off, right? But if there's an offer on the table that's going to be 30, 40, 50K a month, right? And Friday is not negotiable, then that's more of a wish list thing, right? And so what I want to do is early on, I want the things on my must-have list are the things that I need to be able to do my job. I look at this as a partnership. I always operate as a business within a business, right? So as a partner, what do I need that business to do, right? Well, I need them to fulfill. And that's going to be one. So high integrity offer that I feel good because I go deep with my prospects, right? I want to be able to push to the very end. I want to be able to draw them out. I really want to be able to commit with full conviction. And I want to believe that what's going to happen, there's not a drop off, right? I like that straight line between what's marketed, what's sold, and fulfillment, right? So I'm looking for that straight line because then I can really go that extra mile for the prospects and really speak with that conviction. So high integrity offers number one, right? That the fulfillment matches what I want to sell, right? Secondly, for me personally, again, this is different. As I got longer in my sales career, I didn't need it as much because I built it into the services that I provided, but proven sales process, right? I don't want to be the guinea pig. I don't want to be the experiment, right? So proven process meaning I come in and I do my job. I am not the job. I'm not the experiment. I'm not the one figuring it out. Now, later on, when you feel really confident in building your own sales process and you kind of have a unique way of selling, you might say, I want to come in. Here's the retainer I charge, right? And let's build the sales process out. But that's a different service, right? So I'm looking at proven sales process, right? I'm looking at predictable earnings. For me personally, some people like being the lone wolf. I never like that. I like being competitive. I like hearing what other people are doing. I like being around a bunch of other killers and top performers, right? So we can all feed off each other. So I'm looking, is someone on the team making the type of money I want to make? If not, it's an experiment. It's a risk. Now, some people are more risk tolerant than others, but again, I'm building that must-have list with the things that I need to even consider. All right. That way, okay, I got 3 offers coming in. 2 of them don't hit the must list. Okay, they're out. Then I only have 1 offer to consider, right? Because temptation comes in, especially if you're out, and everybody has a different relationship with being unemployed, right? And so oftentimes it's like, I just need a job, but you and I both know you don't need the job. You need an opportunity, right? So now we look at the wish list. Now we put the Friday on. Now we look at, no meetings. Now we look at this and that and whatever else. And my goal over time is to get so much leverage and performance that now my wish list starts going on my must-have. So if I came back now and started selling for someone else, I would have a very small wish list and a big must-have list. When I'm starting out, I want a very lean and impactful must-have list and a very big wish list. Right. And so as I get more leverage, which is time, money, past performance, then I start moving things over and I can negotiate those wish lists into my must-haves.
Never thought about it like that. Never once thought about it like that. I was just like, oh, can this offer make me 10K, 15K, whatever it is? Now as I spend longer in the space and you jump on offer to offer, you realize that, because I've been a guinea pig a couple of times and you don't want to be a guinea pig, right? You jump on, hey, do this. Like I thought I was just meant to take closing calls, And yeah, it's a completely different game ball to when you're being that guinea pig to actually being on a proven offer. It's such a huge difference.
I think for me,
100%.
I think for me what was crazy about the space is like I didn't know how many the number of actual legit offers is so low. And it's actually crazy. And I didn't know like we would even have to have a conversation about like can you sell this with integrity or can you not sell this with integrity? But it's like at some point, like I feel like for the long game or whatever, well, just so it actually aligns ethically, you don't wanna ever be associated with like anytime I hear a post or I see someone making big money, especially that's new in this space, I always kind of feel, well, what does the offer actually look like? Because, and I've been on offers that have, promised, like there was 60% success rate, 70% success rate. Selling that stuff at the beginning, I was like, this is the best thing ever. But then you actually, like with time, like 1 month or 2 months in, you figure out,
Right.
well, that's not the case because people get back with you. But what I've
Right.
seen many offers do is like they get a closer for 1 month, 2 months,
Yeah.
and the closer makes money because they feel at the beginning, oh, this is good.
Right.
But then they get to, yeah, you know what I'm saying?
The
It's
honeymoon stage, right?
yeah,
That honeymoon stage where you're like, this is awesome because you're going through and your idea of fulfillment is the same as the prospects. It's the marketing,
yeah,
right? And so you're like, oh, the deliverables and all these things, this is great, right? But again, that's what I'm looking for, that straight line where again, success rate is difficult, right? Because imagine I'm an acting coach, right? Well, like, what's the success rate on that? Right? Like how many of my acting students are going to be successful? What I look at is that straight line,
yeah,
right? Is what I'm talking about in the marketing, right? And what I'm talking about in the sales, is it matched in fulfillment? And that straight line. And what
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of businesses have, right? That crazy marketing. And that's something I struggle with when I started having, like, I've done a lot of these things on my own because I've hired people and copywriters and stuff. And I'm like, no, this is ridiculous. And like, I can't
yeah,
promise that. And what about this situation? And you're competing in this space where, I might be able to get you to a certain point with, predictability and confidence, but then
yeah,
someone who can triple the numbers but has a 5% chance, right? They're selling more. But
yeah,
I hope that catches up to those people, and we're starting to see that more now. And I think that's the biggest thing when I came in the space is I annoyed a lot of people because I spoke up. And I spoke up when it wasn't my spot. And I spoke up and people said, it's jealousy or it's this or that. And it's like, no, I've stepped in shit. Why would I not tell the person behind me that I stepped
yeah,
in shit? And if I'm
Yeah.
wrong, it should be very easy to just say, well, here's 100 people that disagree. But I see so many people in this space that are like, yeah, I basically put myself in a hole and I worked with this company and I bought this and it cost me this much time and money, right? And then it's like, oh, but I'll just leave it for the next person to do it, right? And some people bounce back from that, but some people don't. And so
yeah,
I think what you guys are doing is extremely important. And I think just having more conversations and not treating this like an individual sport. I think that's so important. You
Yeah.
know, when it's time to be competitive, I'm as competitive as anybody, right? Like if it's cutthroat, if it's a game of chicken, I'll go to the very edge. But I believe that the true competition comes from giving away my secrets, giving my competition, giving the people around me the things that
yeah,
are competitive advantage, because that gets me hungry to go look for the new things, right? That's true competition. If I have a bunch of advantages and little secrets and I don't share those, then it's not much of a competition, right? If I share my best stuff, then it becomes a real competition.
yeah,
Then it challenges me, like what I'm doing with UCM 4.0 right now is I've given all my best stuff, right? And so now I'm going through the vault and thinking about the last 17 years and going and thinking about other top performers and what can I do to elevate again, right? And I think that's a big aspect of what we do in UCM is collaborative, right? 100 people
yeah,
working together, sharing, oh, don't interview with those, or this is great. Or, we have companies that we work with where one person got in and now we have 40 salespeople from UCM in that one company, right? Because we open the back doors for people and that makes
Yeah.
us all better. There's an abundance in the space. And so I think that competitive nature with collaborative strategic alignments is a very unstoppable force.
what I wanted to congratulate you on is for how engaged the UCM is and how much value there's actually inside. And I sometimes get people that are, either like Polish or they're in sales, like completely new to this space. I always direct them to our community, of course, but also
Mhm.
to you guys as well. Because
Sure.
I mean, strongly believe like if you connect the two, there's so much value there, and I think that's what best prepares you. What I wanted to ask you though, because I see you, I really enjoy your posts. Like there's so much value in them, and especially I like that you already brought it up. I was gonna ask like, um, it was pretty much on like you being in recruiting and like seeing those patterns, like people being screwed over. But that wasn't the point. What I wanted to ask is, how do you keep up with all the like content? Like, how do you keep up with the Facebook game?
Yeah,
Because
because
that's
like
impressive.
yeah, because I messaged you and we were having a conversation straight away after like 5 minutes. People messaging me and like they're for like 2 days I haven't responded. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you're definitely a
Yeah.
lot busier than me.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like caffeine is a big factor. That's probably number one. But what I've gotten really good at or getting better at as because this mentorship is a totally new muscle for me, right? Especially going from sales where it's like get back to the individual, it's like, I'm responsible for only my performance. And now being responsible for, 600 students over the last 3 years, right? And trying to translate that. I think for me, it's the awareness of what am I really great at and not falling in love with the CEO hat. That's been
Mm.
something that I've been really, really, I've learned a lot from, I'm very observant of other businesses. And I think a lot of these businesses that are no longer relevant or impactful, I want to believe they started out with good intentions. But I think it's very attractive to fall in love with the business owner, CEO, founder type role, right? The
Mhm.
mover and the shaker and the overseer. And what I've decided is, one, I'm not good at those things. I'm not really great at the systems and processes and the delegation and stuff like that, right? Like there's a few things I'm really good at and then everything else I suck at. I'm not like a jack of all trades, and so I've accepted that. And there's a few things like community, right?
Yeah.
Communication, strategizing, right? And building that kind of loyalty and kind of pack, right? And sales. So I do my own communication, right? When you get an email from me, when you get a DM from me, it's me, um, because that's what I want to do. And so I can delegate the CEO task. I can delegate the things that someone else could oversee the business, run the day to days, right? What I want to do and where the competitive advantage is, I believe for me is on the ground, right? And that, I can book these calls, I can be on Facebook answering in real time. Students know they can reach out to me at any time. It's that personal factor. Because again, like, there's only so many strategies and impact, right? There's you should be learning from everybody in the space, right?
Yeah.
But where I think the true competitive advantage, like we've had people that try and like, spy on UCM, and I've had, students reach out being like, hey, this person's reaching out, like basically survey me about it. I'm like, sure. Yeah, that's fine. You could give them all the strategies, you could open it up, but where the factor is that human contact.
Mhm.
And so that's something I've committed to where that is my number one priority, more than running the business, more than, marketing and all of these things. It's like, the community and the fulfillment and that accessibility. And so I started UCM with core values. That's something I always come back to. It's like, what are the core values I want to bring into this? And then when there's tough decisions to be made, I just constantly come back to that. And honesty, transparency, integrity, community, but that transparency and that accessibility for me were the biggest ones. And so I just always make decisions based on that accessibility, always being there, right?
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
like
it's tough to
one yeah. Well, one thing I also wanted to touch on is like, I was really impressed by that post. We can probably put it in the links. It's kind of like what got you to start UCM. It was like
Mm,
seeing, people being kind of screwed over in the recruitment process. Why not just let people get screwed? Like why help people? Like, because there's so many A players in this game, so many
right,
top tier salesmen, but
right,
there's not that many that actually take the steps to help other people.
right. Yeah, I think probably a little bit of ignorance and stupidity, and just naiveness. But I kind of have a rule for my life that if I find myself complaining about something more than 3 times, I have to do something about it.
Mhm.
And as a recruiter, it was impacting my business. So it wasn't the idea of like, oh, I'm going to build this mentorship and I'm going to compete with these other. It was like,
Yeah.
well, there is a flood of unprepared people who don't even know what this industry is. They're
Yeah.
applying for a job, they're interviewing, they have no idea what this is. They've been told that this is a gold rush, once in a lifetime, people lining up down the block to stuff your pockets full of cash. They just
Yeah.
were like, filling out dollar surveys and, like
Oh,
translating things online.
Yeah.
And then they
we've
stumbled
all been
upon this
there.
and they thought this was like the holy grail. They have no idea what this is. And they're interviewing and they don't realize why this is never going to work.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was affecting my recruiting business, but also I entered this industry and was sold on a bunch of BS. Right. I
Yeah.
spun my tires and I was someone who was told, right, like, oh, you just have to invest more. Right. And I was doing everything. Right. I heard the same things. You have to invest more or you're not working hard enough. And I was in South Korea at the time working 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. I don't know if there was many people at that moment that were working harder than me, right? And I was making about $4 an hour. Right? And
Shit.
so I'm like, how much would this have? How much harder could I work, right?
Hmm.
To get it to what, 6, 8, right? It's not working. And I can't see how more of what isn't working, right? Investing in
No,
more. And this is the crazy logic that I'm seeing people is like, hey, I invested in what you told me would work. It doesn't work. Okay, so what I'm going to do, invest in you again. Right. And so I understand the desperation and I understand what that's like. And again, it was affecting me, but I was complaining about it. And I kind of felt that like that frustration or that spite. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to just do a little case study. At the time, what I thought was maybe once every 2 months, do like 5 or 10 people, keep the closing, keep the recruiting, and just kind of do it as a side. Maybe that would lead to more people, like a better, quality network for recruiting. And then I launched that first case study, and it was supposed to be for 5 people, and 55 showed up, and it kind of became bigger than me right off the bat. And so it's been nonstop ever since. And I've just been kind of adjusting to
yeah.
this organism that's larger than me.
Did you expect it at the beginning to like grow so big, like from 5 to 55?
No, 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 no. Like I was I was imagining a 3 month, 5 person case study that would balance with everything else I'm doing. I had no, like, there was no training. I had no course. I had nothing on the back end. It was literally just me. I had no team. I had no sales. No, it was just, I had a bunch of strategy sessions and people just kept asking to come in. And so, yeah, I had no sweet clue that this was going to happen. I thought I would stay more on the recruiting side, and then I was doing part-time closing and kind of building out sales processes. And like I said, I had a good kind of offer going where I was getting paid a retainer up front to start, and 20% commission on everything I closed, and then replacing myself after the sales process was developed and things were clean. That was a pretty smooth process for me and pretty lucrative. So I had no plans to be a mentor. It wasn't something I was looking forward to, and it was quite a pay cut to do it. But I did get quite a sense of purpose from it, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Where does that one rule you talked about come from? The if you complain about something 3 times, it's time to do something about it.
I think so early on in my life, I was kind of the black sheep, and so growing up,
Hence the
like,
shirt.
yeah, exactly. I've had a very unique way of looking at things. I always kind of, from like, I hold my pencil weird. It's just everything I do is kind of weird and backwards. So I've just always had people telling me I'm doing wrong, or you can't do this and you can't do that. And growing up, it was kind of like until probably my early 20s, it was more of just like adjusting or thinking that I'm falling short. Right? It's like thinking I'm lazy or thinking I'm disorganized or thinking I'm this, right? Instead of finding that uniqueness, right? Looking for that approval seeking kind of behavior.
Mhm.
And then I realized, you know what? Like, I'm never going to get that approval anyway. If I do it their way, I'm going to do it poorly. Right? But if I do it my way, right, then I'm more excited to do it, right? And I have more leverage. And so I think turning that kind of anger or frustration or sadness or whatever it was from like falling short on that people pleasing approval thing we all seek and trying to be cool and trying to, fit in, right? To being like, if I'm gonna stand out, I might as well fucking actually stand out and lean in that direction. And so I think I started to do a lot more personal development and realize that like this spitefulness or this kind of anger or whatever it was could be channeled into something positive, right? Like, I think I'm a big fan of like recycling certain energy. Like my fuck ups turn into experiences, turn into wisdom, right? And wisdom is leverageable. Fuck ups really aren't, right? And so this spite is kind of a short term and it made me feel like it kind of made me out of control. And so I wanted to kind of form a recycling process that I could channel it and use it as fuel. And I realized that like determination and drive and kind of will was a good transition, right? Just like nervousness transitions into excitement very easy, right? Instead of just trying to say calm down, right? No, get excited, right? And so every negative emotion has a translation to a positive, right? And that spitefulness or that whatever it was, I turned into like determination and drive and like I'll prove it, right? And so I think that came from that of like instead of reacting to that external, internalize it, right? And if I'm wrong, it should be very easy to prove that I'm wrong. So prove it, right? And that's something that I still use to this day with students, with myself, right? When you get that negative self-talk that we all get, right? We can't pretend it's
We're not
there.
immune, yeah.
Yeah.
Even at the highest level, we get it,
Yeah.
right? Well, all I do instead of fighting that voice is like, prove it. Oh, you can't do this. Okay, prove it, right? You should be able to prove it by putting your best effort in, and then you should be able to get no progress, and that should prove it, right? But I've never been able to prove that negative talk right, right? And so I'm okay with experimenting it, right? And so that complaint, the idea was like, oh, if they're so bad, prove it, right? If you can do better, prove it, right? Like if they're not, like again, their big thing is like, oh, well, not everybody's cut out for it, or they're not putting the work in. Well, mine was like, okay, I'll prove it, right? And so I just took that on of like, there is, right? I'll never understand. There's a percentage of people who will go on a call with me. I pressure test, right? I'm talking people out of joining UCM at most times. I start every call by telling them what I don't do well, what my limitations are, and why they probably shouldn't buy, right? I want to know their concerns. They fight for it, they get in, and then from day one, they don't show up. I chase people down. I can't get a hold of them. I can't get them to show up. I can't get them to there's always a percentage of that.
Yeah.
But when I looked out at the time, there was two major players. Right. We've seen that one got slapped with the FTC. The other one is, wears weird suits. And yeah, well, not to name names here, but there was two big players there, right? And they were basically saying the 5 to 10% success rate that we were seeing, everybody else was not cut out for it or not working hard. And I said, okay, let's prove that. So I took the misfits and the rejects and the people that were written off, right? And I was able to have 70% success rate with those people, the people that failed and were told that they couldn't have the success, right? In a quick time, in my first round with no fancy program, I had a slideshow, but I got on calls, right? And I worked with people. And I realized what this actually is the underbelly of stuff we don't talk about. That someone can really want it, someone can have the skill, capability, ability, potential, but there's other things that hold us back. And we all know that. We've all experienced that. There's some days where you have the skill, you have the knowledge, you have everything that you need ingredient-wise, but you can't show up, right? There's trauma, there's emotional regulation, there's decision making, there's all those things. And so I started working on that underbelly of like what's more than just knowing what to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
And that was a big factor of like doesn't get everybody, but a large percentage of people, when you help them with the knots that are tied up, right? When you remove some of that resistance, they take off. Some of our best students were ones that it wasn't strategy and it wasn't skill and it wasn't, tonality or objections, and it wasn't landing a job. It was that underbelly stuff that has all held us all back. Right. And so how can we just ignore that aspect of it, where you go in most programs and you look and it's mindset, get your shit together, like step it up, go hard, right? Work ethic, determination. But there's another aspect of that people should be focused on as well, right?
Yeah, because you can have the skills, right? You can have the skills, the strategies, the word tracks, the frameworks, the scripts, everything. But then if you're sitting on the call and you're shitting yourself and you're have all that mental negative self loops going around and around and around and like thinking of all the times you fucked up, then that's only going to affect you as well. Because I know I felt that for sure myself, and I've been working on it lately. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I have like I know the objections, I've closed these deals, and there's some days where you just wake up and you don't necessarily want to be on a sales call because it's like the whole mental aspect side of things, and no one ever really talks about that. It's just learn the skills and then that's it, right?
Right. Yeah, and I
Eh,
think even greater, that became one of the best sales training and skill development that I've ever went through. It's like understanding myself and when I make bad decisions. Because again, under what we focus on in UCM is we are decision-making facilitators. My job is not to sell, it's to optimize and facilitate decisions. Right? I want to facilitate the best decision possible. If that's a no, I'm happy to get the no. Right? If no is optimal, my job is to get the no with 100% confidence. If yes is optimal, my job is to get the yes, right? So from our own standpoint, no one here makes 100% optimal decisions, right? Well, why don't we? Why don't we make optimal decisions? Well, sometimes it's illogical, irrational, fear-based, emotional, right? Ignorance, right? Misinformation, right? There's lots of factors. So the more I started kind of diving into, hey, when do I make bad decisions and why? The more I understand, the more I seen and developed empathy for my prospect, because I see myself, right? And so we're talking about salespeople, but let's talk about prospects. There's
Yeah.
people who on the call, should buy, could buy, who don't buy.
mhm.
Why not? Right? They have the information, they have the strategy, they have the opportunity, right? It's the same thing. So we're pretending that doesn't exist, right? That it's either people operate optimally because they're built for it or they don't. When in our own lives, we can identify, and with prospects, we can identify. There's people that have all the ingredients, but something in the recipe is missing, right? So I just took that personal care and kind of got in at an individual level. I know why it's not profitable. I get it. My business model doesn't make sense, as far as profitability, because I have to get to know each individual and see what that block is. Right. But as far as if you're telling me that these people can't be successful because they're not working hard enough, that's a cop out. That's a lack of accountability. Right. You're just over promising and under delivering. And so I just, again, prove it. Right. And so I proved it.
Nice. Nice. Is that one of the core fundamentals you break down in UCM, is the whole mental side of things, or what's kind of covered there in your UCM? Because in all honesty, I don't really know too much about what it is you specifically do as a training program.
Yeah. So what we look at is one, development, right? Personal and professional development, right? You are the product. And so much of, when you look at this industry, people always say like, is it flooded? And I think they're always expecting me to be like, no, 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 no. Yes, it is flooded,
Mhm.
right? But where does the flood happen? It happens in the basement, right? You don't flood the penthouse. So,
Yeah.
right, what happens in basic economic, people forget that this is not some like unicorn industry. It runs on the basic rules of economics, just like anything else. It's just supply and demand. So there is too much supply compared to the small percentage of demand for top opportunities. You
Yeah.
can argue the numbers, but I would say somewhere around 18 to 20% of the opportunities have six-figure potential in them, right? In the space, right? Maybe a little bit lower
Yeah.
now, but again, right? So, and we look at 40,000, 50,000 closes all coming in, right? There's a supply and demand issue, which most people get scared of, right? Because it's like, well, how do we balance that? But value is something really interesting because there's value and then there's perceived value. A perfect example of that would be diamonds, right? You would think by the value of diamonds that there's scarcity. There's actually not scarcity. There's people hoarding diamonds and there's a whole thing of like diamond banks and stuff, and they release a certain amount, right? But the perceived value came from the marketing, came from the diamond ring, came from the status, right? So if you can't change the scarcity or you can't change the supply and demand, you have to change the perceived value, right? So what I realized is everybody's going through the same training, right? Like the people I'm competing with, we know how to do these certain things, right? There's only so many options as far as getting a competitive advantage. If I learn the same things everybody else learns, it's not a competitive advantage anymore, right? Where my competitive advantage is in my own character development, is in my own core value development, is in the ability to make better decisions, solve problems faster, be more resourceful, develop the characteristics that are more perceived value, like resilience and drive and empathy and all those. Then as a product, as a service, right, the perceived value goes up, right? That's my competitive advantage. So we focus a lot on that development. Again, it can be the foundations of kind of untying the knots, right? Like what has happened in the past and kind of giving some foundation all the way to peak performance, right? So how do we get the most out of, or how do we rebound, or how do we be more proactive in problem solving before it exists, right? So that's a sliding scale there. That's the development side. We have myself and John, who's I think one of the best kept secrets in the remote sales space. I brought him in because he has no sales brain. He's never been in sales, right? A lot of the mindset coaches in sales, again, it's like rah, rah, he's the opposite, right? And so there you're dealing with imposter syndrome, perfectionism, procrastination, fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, self-worth, all those aspects that, again, if you have any of those things, if anybody's ever struggled with depression, anxiety, imposter syndrome, you know that there's more than just knowing what to do and how to do it. Everybody's had that frozen moment where you know exactly what to do in front of you. You've had the task and you're not doing it. That's not skill and strategy, right? So we cover that basis because, again, that's a major factor based on what I've heard and when I'm listening to people, not what I think I want to teach people, but when I look out and I observe, that's a major roadblock. The next aspect is in that professional development and creating opportunities. So this is landing, this is networking and outreach and recruiter etiquette and researching companies and offer vetting and interview prep and interview mastery and all the aspects to be able to find and land high income opportunities, right? And create your own pipeline. Again, I think so many people go linear and it's like, okay, I do this, I do the application to get the interview. Okay, stop the application. Then I do the interview to get the job. Okay, stop all that. What we do is take these like organic marketing principles so that we're always an hour or a day away from another opportunity, that we have a constant flow, right? Like Adidas doesn't stop marketing because sales are great, right? Like the
Yeah.
top companies in the world, it's like, oh, we had a record month last month. Okay, let's stop sponsorships. Let's stop events. Let's stop, these athletes, right? We don't, right? So we continue as sales as our service, right? We continue marketing ourselves. We continue building attention, bringing to our brand, right? And so that's kind of the aspect of like organic marketing principles to create an abundance of opportunities and kind of fill that pipeline. And then the performance aspect, which is one, onboarding and modeling. I'm a big fan of modeling early on. I think especially when you get offer vetting and selection right, you're going to have proof points. So again, what happens? We've all been on a campaign where you get a script, right? You get the onboarding,
Yeah.
but then you listen to the top people and you're like, whoa, where are they? There's a big gap there, right? So what usually happens is you spend a month or 2 months doing the script, you cap out, and then you start learning all the little secrets and changes and stuff. But that's a 3, 4, 5, 6 month timeline. What I do is reverse it, right? So I'll take the top performer, right? I'll get their transcripts. So I'll take one of the recordings, I'll transcribe it, I'll build a process off that using the elements of, what is the script? And then what is the top performer, and finding that middle ground. So modeling early on, and then we move into like a situational selling, which is, for me, again, there's a lot of misconceptions about situational selling. It's not a different methodology. It's not this versus that. It's understanding that each methodology is built for predictable results, meaning it works some of the time with some of the people, right? And we've all had that on calls where it's like the same thing that works the last 10 times, someone is resistant to it, or they're like, what are you talking about? Or, and as salespeople, we love to use the scapegoat of like, they just had ego, but maybe the process that you're forcing them through is not built for them, right? And so situational selling is saying each camp, each methodology it's proven, it works, right? Some of the time with some of the people, it's optimized for a certain standard, right? Now there's deviations, right? There's certain different awareness levels. If someone comes in and they're like, yeah, it's between you and another guy. I've been doing the research for 2 years. It's all laid out. I'm committed. I'm trying to make a decision. If you start talking about consequence with them, you've lost them, right? And that's what a big people struggle with consequence, right? They're like, how do I get it? It's awkward. It's not awkward when people aren't aware of the consequence and they haven't went through that process, right? But if you're forcing someone who's at a solution stage to go back in their decision-making process, it doesn't make sense. So what that is a deviation, right? There's a standard process that works some of the time with some of the people, and I use that as often as it works, right? And then when I identify deviations, that's when I adjust my process instead of forcing the prospect to adjust their process to me. And it just gives that adaptability where basically all the sales processes you've learned, you can turn them into more of a spice. And then you can add different spices from all. It's kind of that mixed martial arts versus, knowing one methodology. And so
Maybe
my
just
job
like
is
a
not,
commute.
yeah, exactly. My job is not to reteach you or be like, that sucks. It's a waste of time and energy. And that's an ego thing to say, like, we have the best way to do it and it's better than this. Forget. And I've had students that come in and it's like, I invested in this trainer, I invested in this trainer, and I have this sales process, and they're all conflict. And so what we do is we kind of elevate that and say, well, why? Why do they say it this way? Why do they say it? What's the commonalities and when, right? Because most sales training will teach you the what and the how, right? What to say, how to say it, right? We focus on the who and the when, right? And so kind of taking all the information out there and organizing it in a way that's practical and kind of principle based so that closers and setters can make their own decisions in the moment rather than memorizing and kind of auto replaying what they've learned, right? I want to educate and kind of empower people to be able to be independent in their decision making and be able to process and understand why the trainer is telling them or why the business owner laid it out, not just what, right? So it's kind of a mix of, land, performance, and develop. And then UCM 4.0 is going to be a lot more focused on peak performance, on that situational mastery to a next level, and then focused on kind of financial side, life after closing, which is a big factor for us. So business, investment, how to kind of build that brand and leverage opportunities beyond that, and then advanced networking and what we call U Inc., which is operating as a business within a business. That's been one of the key strategies for me and one of the most impactful things in my career is I operate as if sales is my service and
Yeah.
I operate as a business owner within that business,
Okay.
even when
got
I
you.
have an employee contract.
Yeah. I just want to touch on one thing you said there, really. It's the whole life aspect. I've seen your post you put up like an hour ago, like of all the countries you visited, all like the best parties, best features, all that stuff. And it's like, how how do you build a life? Because ultimately that's the reason why I got in here, to ultimately
Mm.
build that life of travel, doing all that stuff. But I found it's just in my sitting room on Zoom calls from like 12 to 10. How did you kind of build that life for yourself? And how do you like structure everything around it?
Right. Well, it's one of those things where you have to kind of be intolerant with certain things. I think what happens is we all start at that point, right? And like I
Hmm.
like to sell a lot on memory and imagination, right? That's a whole nother topic, but I think that like a lot of people say they sell on emotion and then buy on logic and all that. I think people it's more memory and imagination. But if we're looking back in the memory, why did we all get into it? If we all had a conversation, if you put 100 of us on this call, how often would we hear freedom? Right? Very
Yeah,
often.
90%
Right?
of the
And then
time,
how
yeah.
many people experience it? Right? Very few. Right? And so what happens typically when people face adversity? So you get in and it's a dream, right? And then reality hits. What happens is we start to make sacrifices, and sacrifices have been mislabeled in this industry and also in life as these courageous. And I don't think it's as courageous as people make it out to be to sacrifice. I think sometimes it's a lack of creativity, right? And so
Mm.
what I've done is always say, before I make the sacrifice, let's go into dreamer mode and say, if I couldn't sacrifice, what would I do to make this happen, right? A lot of people, it's like A or B, and then if those don't work, they drop to C, right? But what if we could combine those two and say, what is a third option that's better for both, right? And so I became intolerant of, when I'm building these pipelines, and again, I guess it comes from having options, right? Like I think true freedom comes from options. It's
Yeah.
not, you don't have to travel like me, you don't have to do any of those things. Do you have the option to do so?
Yeah, because
Right. And so,
that's what it's about, right? The freedom of choice. Do what you want.
right, exactly. That's where true freedom, because you can't identify what freedom actually is. It means something different to everybody. But for me, it was the options. And so what I did was I wanted to build it up to a spot where I have lots of options, where I can walk away from a 25, 30, 40K a month opportunity if I'm not able to live the life I want. Right? So it's a lifestyle design and career design, but also it starts with having the options. As I built the pipeline and I'm surrounded by these top opportunities and I'm getting a flow of them, I felt this abundance. And so, I made $120,000 in 4.5 months, and I walked away from that opportunity to go travel through Europe, right? Knowing that I can come back and get to that point in any moment. Right. And
Yeah.
so I think it's the intolerance of remembering why I got into this in the first place. This to me is a vehicle. If there was a better vehicle at the time, I would have said fuck remote sales. I am not tied to it, but I think when it taps into the insecurities of people and it makes us feel this imposter syndrome, we get this focus, I gotta get better, I gotta get better, I gotta get, and then we get vulnerable to the marketing, which is selling us on this idea of top 1%. I don't think most people give a shit about the top 1%. I think they
No.
buy into the idea of it, but I never, when I was making 30, 40K a month, I never sat in bed and being like, I wonder what percentage I am. I don't give a shit. If the numbers add up to my lifestyle, right? Like at the
Yeah.
end of the month, can I live the lifestyle I want? Am I experiencing the things I want? I am using this to live. I am not living to be a remote closer for some company. So if they start to infringe on my freedom, then they're gone, right? And that's been called everything from entitlement and you shouldn't be jumping around. But at the end of the day, what I've realized is when I was struggling to pay my bills, right, after taking bad advice, no one popped up to help. At the end of the day, am responsible for my success and my failures.
Yeah.
I am the only one that has to be happy with my decisions at the end of the day. And so I'm not willing to sacrifice my life to build someone else's dream where if I didn't sell for 3 to 6
Exactly.
weeks in a row, they would can me, right? Loyalty is an amazing thing. I love loyalty and it's something really important to me. It's one of my core values. And I I try my best to be loyal in those situations, but not to a fault,
It
right?
has to go
I'm
both ways.
never willing to sacrifice my life for someone else's idealism, right?
Yeah.
And so it comes from that abundance thinking. It comes from one, creating the opportunities. So there is abundance, so there are more options, right? But then having certain things that I'm intolerant. I'm never going to let closing be my life, right? This is just, this is something I did to create those travel tokens and fun tokens, right? And I don't take it that serious.
I think it's also knowing your numbers because, like, I mean, every single one of us, like all three of us, like we all got sold on the dream of, like, take 3, 4 hours of calls, make 10K. Like, everyone wants that, right? But like, reality comes and like you actually get to understand this industry. Most likely at the beginning, you're not gonna be making 3 to 4 calls and then making that 10K. So it's gonna
Right.
be like 8, 9 calls a day, especially as a beginner, and a lot of self work. So I feel like actually, if you understand, like, shit, even maybe 5K, this is all you need. Like, why go for a number that's not even yours, right? And I feel like people just go kind of for that ego. Oh, I mean, I'm making 10K, I'm making 15K, I'm making 20K, but my life is shit,
Right.
right? Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
just like that deep reflection, like coming back to like the mindset thing. Yeah, like that inner work.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a student the other day, like fell short this year. He was supposed to do 250K was the goal, fell short 238K, right? And a couple months ago, he's like, man, I don't know what it is. I'm struggling to hold the number one spot, right? And like it's stressing me out. And I just asked him, like, why do you need the number one spot? And you could tell it was like, oh yeah, why do I need the number one spot? And he, dropped, and I said, well, what if you had the perfect lifestyle and you spent more time with your wife and more time, doing the things you want, and you're eating steaks and you're working out in the morning and you take Friday afternoons off and you were top three, right? Or you're top one and you have no life, right? So again, I think that's a really important point, Sam, is ask yourself why. No one gives a shit about 10K. No one's a paper collector. It's not
No.
like I love this paper and how it feels.
Unless it's
Right? It's
IRS.
simple as something, right? So like, again, there's certain milestones where like if you're making 8K or 10K, you don't notice a difference in your life. The
No.
jump from 10K to 12K is not much difference. What I found is like around 8K is a great milestone. It's a great milestone. Like 8K is a great milestone. And then from there, really, like, you don't see a quality of life change until about 18 to 20K, right? And then from there, you really don't see a quality of life change until about 40, 50K, right? And so you have to be able to look at, is it, at these milestones, one, how can I get more time back first? Right? At a certain point, once you get past that 12, 15K, right, you should be trying to buy your time back, because your time is now more valuable if you look at your per hour rate, right? You should be focused more on how can I get my time back, right? Because then you can look at, opportunities for the bigger jumps instead of these like progressive. I think a lot of people get too trapped in the progressive of like 8 to 10, 10 to 12, 12 to 15. For me, it was like, okay, I got a baseline of, 10. I want to go now for 40, right? But I want to do it within these parameters. And so I used a certain percentage of my time to get to that 10. And then everything else wasn't meant to be progressive in nature. I had bonus time, and that bonus time was now big scale, right? Because again, I looked at it and it's like, what is my, I'm living in a place where I can't spend $3,000 a month. I'm trying to, and I can't do it, right? Like, what is this extra 3K bump going to do, right? But 10 to 40 cut my retirement time, right, by 3/4, right? So that made sense, right? So what I wanted to do in remote sales is be done in 5 years, right? And so it was 4.5 before I got into recruiting in UCM, but 5 years, condense a 20-year career into 5 years and be financially free at that time, right? And so I think that like good to great, or good to excellent, or great to excellent, I think people need to be mindful of what is the new priority, because they were so passionate about the goal early on, right? But once you get to a certain point, right, like what's the difference between 4% body fat and 5% body fat, right? If 5% mean you can eat what you want to a certain degree and enjoy a few things, a lot more people would be happy at 5% than 4, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't emphasize that more. It took me some time to realize that my goal, kind of back then when I started at the start of this year, wasn't actually what I wanted. I was just following a
Right.
herd
Right.
of all these
Yeah.
other people that wanted to hit 10K.
Right.
So,
Yeah. No one gives a shit. And then you ask them why, because I always ask, why do you want to hit that? Right. And say, well, that's 6 figures. And it's like, well, no, like 8,300 is 6 figures, right? 8,500, something like that. Right. So it's not even, they have no connection to it. Like, I want to break 6 figures, which is just another monetary goal. Well, no, 6 figures isn't even 10K. That's more. It's 120. Right. And so it's like, it's not connected to anything, right? Well, why do you really want that? Well, I want to put my kids through college, or I want to do this. Well, that's really important. Let's prioritize that, right? And then let's figure out what that costs. A lot of people live in pipe dreams, and we have this kind of exercise in UCM that takes things. So if I asked you, where's your dream vacation? And you said, I want to go to Japan, or I want to go Maldives, or whatever, right? If I asked you, well, how much would that cost? And you don't know, it's a pipe dream. Right?
Mm,
If I ask you what a hotel costs in Japan and you don't know, it's a pipe dream. Right? If I ask you what age you want to retire, you say 50, and I say, how much do you need in the bank to be able to do that? If you don't give me an accurate number, it's a pipe dream. To move it to a dream, it has to be detailed, right? To move it to a goal, it has to have specifics and timeline, right? To move it to probable, it has to have action, strategy, a model that works, right? And action. So, being able to, the pipe dreams are great, but they can't stay pipe dreams, right? So I want to make 10K. That's great. Well, why? And what does that mean? And what does that take? And what is that each day? A lot of people, you ask them their monthly goal, they know. You ask them, well, how many deals is that? They don't know. You ask them, how much is that per day, per week? They don't know. Right. And so it's a pipe dream that's not connected to anything. It doesn't motivate, it doesn't inspire, it doesn't have fuel to it. Right. But if it's, I want to put my kids in this university, right? Well, how much is the tuition? Okay. And how old are your kids? Right. And now we can start building the dream that's connected, that when you hit those adversities, right, you're thinking about that thing rather than a random number that some marketer told you. Right. And so just connect to, I think a big thing that we do now is kind of lifestyle design and career design. And I think those are really important because, again, most of us got in for that, and not forgetting that we didn't come in to be top closers. Right. We came in to be able to get to where we want to be. And this is the best vehicle. If there was a better vehicle, we'd all be doing it. Right.
Yeah.
If we all had a better option, if anybody's so committed to closing, right? Like, if when you founded this industry, there was an opposing industry that had more money opportunity, easier access, right? And you thought it was a better opportunity, you wouldn't be here. None of us would be. Right. So remember that this is just a vehicle, not an ego boost. And if you're not into it for being a top closer, then prioritize getting into it for having the best lifestyle.
Yeah, sure. Shit, that actually hits home a little bit. Need to start designing the lifestyle I want to live now. Yeah, so JD, I just had a look at the time. I noticed we just ran over the hour mark, and I want to be conscious of your time. So I guess any final parting thoughts?
I think kind of just picking up on what we just talked about, really understanding why you're here, right? And as there's adversity, which there will be, right? And supposed to be, there's supposed to be adversity. As there's setbacks, right? Have something that you can go back to often. For me, it's my values, my vision, and what's truly important to me, because there's temptations and there's frustrations, and this is not a straight line. And the beautiful thing about this industry, and the tough thing, is it brings up a lot of the vulnerabilities. There's nowhere to hide. In corporate job, you can pull up a fake spreadsheet and look really busy, and you can get through a hungover Friday after drinks Thursday. You can hide. There's nowhere to hide in this industry. Everything is brought to the forefront. And when you're off, it shows you're off. And when you're struggling with confidence or imposter, and it brings to the surface. And that's not punishing you. That's a great gift. And so understand and make the decision early on why you're doing this and what it's worth. I had a conversation with myself when I first began. What is this worth? The juice and the squeeze. And at what point is it no longer worth it? And I realized that if it crosses my moral boundaries, it's not worth it. Right? If I can't look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day, it's not worth it. There's no amount of money for that. I'm not willing to sell my integrity. Right? If it kills me health-wise, then I can't spend the money anyway. Right? So my health and well-being and my morals, everything else was up for grabs. When it came to success, I thought everything else is on the table. Everything else is worth it. When I envisioned what I wanted my life to be, right, as long as it didn't affect those things, I was willing to pay the price. That way, I made that decision once. I see people trying to make that decision every day. And I think that gets very tough, right? Is now the time I should give up? What about this? Right? And it gets tempting and tempting. Eventually, those people fall off, right? This is not an industry where you can kind of dip a toe for too long. You can try it out. Maybe it's not for you, but you got to be either in or out, right? And I think it really helps to sit down and say, what do you want? And what does that work to you? Is it worth, right, that the struggles, the trials, the tribulations, is it worth sacrificing at times and being creative on other times and dealing with that adversity? And if it is, stop making the decision. Make it once and commit, right? And develop two mindsets. I think you only really, truly need two mindsets in this space. I think you need a growth mindset, knowing that it's okay and probably very likely that you will suck. Everything that we've done, we sucked at. At one point, the four of us were babies. We could barely lift our heads. Everything we are right now that gets called talent was developed. So The fixed mindset people struggle with it because they think like, oh, what if I suck? Well, you probably will, right? But do you have the ability to get better? Yes, we all do, right? Are you willing to get better? Are you willing to value progress and improvement over results in the beginning? Great. Growth mindset, number one. Second, service mindset. This is very hard for people that are in scarcity coming into this out of desperation, right? But economic rule, service providers are paid, consumers pay. A lot of people come into this industry as a consumer, and what do? They complain about everybody's trying to sell me. Well, yeah, because you're coming in like a consumer, right? The only people that get to come in and say, I want this and are prospects, right? Who else gets to come in and say, I want this? Imagine if I came in and I was like, I want more UCM students, like messaging people that's crazy, right? So if you come in as a consumer, don't be surprised that you get treated like a prospect and people see you, right? You're raising your hand. I want a job. I want 10K. Those are prospect words, right? So that's why you're being targeted and sold to, right? If you come in as a service provider, knowing that I eat best when I eat last, when I get the business owner what they want and the prospect what they want, I don't even have to worry about what I want. It just falls in place. When you look at it, there's consumers who pay and there's service providers who get paid. If you want to come in this space, you have to have that service first mentality. You have to eat last. If you do those two things, each day I'm going to be better than the start of the day, right? If I detach from the results and say, at the end of the day, I am better than I was at the start of the day, each day, and each day I'm looking at my value is based on how I serve and the impact on others, you can't lose. It becomes a matter of if to when, right? And when that gives you certainty, right? So that would be my parting words.
I love it.
Yeah, love it, bro. It was a great podcast. Appreciate you jumping on, and it's a pleasure to get to know you a little bit more.
Appreciate it, guys. I love what you're doing. Keep it up. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. But I really love it. I've been watching you guys' episodes, and I'm really happy you guys are doing this. So thanks for having me on.
No worries, bro.
I have a feeling we'll see you again. So
yeah, I'm sure you will. Yeah.
Absolutely. Take care, guys.
Yeah, take
See you
care.
later.
Bye-bye.